All right, man, peace. So as many of you brothers may know by now, especially over the last few days, one of the main storylines that the mainstream liberal sports media is trying to push on the viewing public is this notion that Leonard decided that he was going to sit down and engage in a video game. I believe he's playing Call of Duty on Twitch, which I believe is a platform where people can view contestants or participants in a video game tournament square off against one another. The mainstream liberal sports media is trying to get people to believe that Leonard decided that he was going to call a so-called Jewish person a quote-unquote kike, and he had no understanding of what he was saying or why he was saying it. When I first saw it, or when I first heard about the story, I should say, I wondered exactly what was going on, but then I remembered that Leonard was one of two people in the NBA who decided that he was not going to sit down or kneel for the playing of the quote-unquote national anthem during the NBA's Black Lesbians Matter bubble tournament. He, along with Jonathan Isaacs, who's a so-called black man, decided that they were going to stand for the national anthem, and that's why I noted that it would not surprise me if Jonathan Isaacs is a program multiple or an asset who's been strategically placed in the NBA. Leonard, I now have to categorize in that same vicinity. That it's a possibility that he could be an MK asset, someone who's basically there to act as a provocateur or an agent of chaos per se. And as we're going to see when they show the very brief clip of Leonard playing Call of Duty in that little Twitch session, I think that there are certain elements of how he's depicting himself that would appear to confirm, or at the very least add on some substance to the notion that this could be another contrived situation or scenario or storyline. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
What better place to discuss the Leonard situation than sitting in front of an image of the most famous Jewish athlete of all time and saying...
Also keep in mind that Leonard's number is the number 0. The number 0, of course, stands for the seed. I believe that Damian Lillard currently wears the number 0 for the Portland Trail Blazers, and Carmelo Anthony wears 00. So that's part of the esoteric link between Damian Lillard and Carmelo Anthony, which implies to me that Dame already knew that Carmelo was going to end up on the Portland Trail Blazers before he got there, as did Carmelo. Let me also say this before it slips my mind. They're playing on a certain paradigm or a certain construct that they've created based on the Kyle Larson storyline of a couple of years ago, where they're trying to act as if their asset says something and they're not quite aware of the profundity of what they're saying. We all know that Kyle Larson, who wears the number 42, which stands for the quote-unquote storm god or the god of chaos, Baal. The number 42 also stands for the word nigger. Kyle Larson, he also had a video game session where he said something pertaining to race. Now they're carrying this over to Leonard.
And look, I want to start off by saying the Jewish community is very divided on how to address the Leonard situation. On one hand, you have Julian Edelman, who's a very famous Jewish football player.
Yes, and he seems to be the go-to guy now for many of these quote-unquote anti-Semitic statements or the rhetoric that's being pushed forth. So Julian Edelman is someone in the overall entertainment sphere. He's not just a quote-unquote wide receiver in the NFL. But that makes sense because he built his name being linked to one of the top warlocks in the sports world, that being Tom Brady. So in an effort to keep him relevant, now his new role is going to be he's going to act as the hub or a handler for people who go off the rails pertaining to quote-unquote anti-Semitism.
Who wants to reach out to Meyers and wants to educate him.
And as I noted in this series that I did on Julian Edelman, and I believe it's Deshaun Jackson, Julian Edelman wears the number 11. Which of course stands for the twin pillars. It also stands for enlightenment.
On this stupid and offensive word he used during a video game session. And then on the other hand, you have Michael Rappaport, who just made a video destroying Leonard for what he believes is a bogus apology. So we're going to get into both of those things, but first a little bit of background. Leonard, who plays for the Miami Heat, has been placed on an indefinite leave after using a very offensive word, a derogatory word often used at Jewish people during a live stream of a video game session earlier this week.
Now, I remember when Michael Jackson got caught up in a bit of a controversy. This is probably well over 20 years ago, where he had some song lyrics where he said "kick me, kike me" or something like that, where he was trying to expose the power and the impact that the so-called Caucasian Jew has in the entertainment industry, particularly the music industry, where they can dictate to you what you sing about, what you rap about, when your art is going to be released, who it's going to be marketed to, so on and so forth, how much control they have behind the scenes, how much they puppet many of the assets that they have behind the scenes. Michael Jackson was monitored programmed as well. He just started to go off the rails, so they had to run him through a series of narratives to destroy his image.
It to basically as an insult.
But don't get it twisted. Michael Jackson, he did suffer from multiple personality disorder, and he was placed under Pan or Patap Men programming. So those allegations about him and the young boys, to me, they bear credence, and that's the reason why he was associated with the film E.T.
They're gamer. Take a look. Let's go, baby.
Now, as we can see here, they're showing Mr. Meyers Leonard. Suddenly, he's decided to dye his hair blonde. We know that the blonde hair is for Heru or Hippocrates, the quote-unquote comedic god of silence, secrecy, and also haphazardness and chaos. He is the chaos bringer. Whenever you see the vast majority of these so-called celebrities, especially athletes or entertainers, musicians, etc., suddenly dye their hair blonde, they tend to take on a mischievous persona or character. Think about, of course, the rapper Eminem.
Bitch. I just dropped it on my head.
And of course, he's also wearing the black and white for Saturn.
Anyways.
Yeah, obviously a lot of bleeps there, but he used the anti-Semitic K word, and after that video surfaced, he issued an apology saying, quote, "I'm deeply sorry for using an anti-Semitic slur during a live stream yesterday. While I didn't know what the word meant at the time, my ignorance about its history and how offensive it is to the Jewish community is absolutely not an excuse, and I was just wrong."
Once again, brothers, please keep in mind that Meyers Leonard was one of the NBA assets who was chosen to decide to quote-unquote take a stand against the Marxist Black Lesbians Matter movement that took place inside of the NBA bubble. So is this just another attempt to manipulate him, to try to demonize him, and by association demonize anyone who is against the bowing down of the knee to Baal in many of these Marxist movements that they're utilizing in the current attempt to reconfigure American society, using so-called black people as the carriers or the pawns? Who knows? But in my view, that's what this is about. I have very little doubt that this person here is MK programmed, and as usual, whenever one of their assets don't really pan out in the NBA or the NFL when it comes to becoming a big star, they'll use them for something else, like I stated about George Hill.
He went on to say that he's going to try to educate himself and learn more, and he's apologizing to the team and all this other stuff. The team that he plays for, the Miami Heat, Mickey Harrison, is an Israeli Jew who was obviously offended by
an Israeli Jew and most likely associated with the Israeli Mossad. A lot of these owners are very high up on the esoteric scale, particularly Kabbalistically. So he might be in the know when it comes to this situation. I'm on record as stating that the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles was in the know when that situation transpired with Deshaun Jackson. Because right after that, all of a sudden, he starts talking about how he has this new biographical feature or documentary coming out pertaining to Hitler and the Nazis, right on the heels of Deshaun Jackson making his quote-unquote anti-Semitic statements. So I'm pretty sure that Mickey Harrison understood that this event was going to transpire, and because Meyers Leonard is expendable, it is what it is. He could have a nice day. The Miami Heat is a witch coven, just like most of the other top NBA and NFL franchises. I did a series on the LA Lakers, the witch coven of purple and gold. The Miami Heat, they're basically like the LA Lakers of the East. We all know about Shaquille O'Neal and Dwayne Wade and their associations not only with the Miami Heat, but also with the esoteric, Kabbalistic, and the world of magic and the worship of the quote-unquote pagan gods of old.
And Mickey Harrison was born in Tel Aviv, Evan.
Yeah, and guess what? Just like a lot of people, he was offended by hearing Meyers Leonard, the 29-year-old, say that term. It's offensive. Here's a shocker. I'm Jewish, and I was offended by it. It makes me so upset. And it's not just the fact that this guy said the word so casually, right? And we've talked about this before, Renee, when people say offensive racial slurs and they get caught. The casualness, right? The ability to just kind of it just flows out of his mouth. It's not the first time he's said that word.
Exactly.
It's the first time he got caught saying that word. And now for him to issue that statement, it's just like, give me a break. And I know Renee and I were talking before the show started about how there are people who don't know the history of that word and how impactful and how hurtful it is.
Yeah.
And my response to that is, then don't use the word. Meyers?
Right, but do you truly believe that Meyers Leonard did not understand the impact of that word from a racial perspective, especially in light of the fact that the owner of the Miami Heat is a so-called Caucasian or quote-unquote Ashkenazi Jew? You really think that Meyers Leonard had no understanding of what he was saying? I'm just not buying it. And by the way, there is some obscurity when it comes to the etymology or the origins of the word quote-unquote kike. Some believe that it comes from the so-called Ashkenazi Jews as they attempted to immigrate into America, where they would go through Ellis Island and they did not want to put down the X, meaning for the unknown, where it listed their name. So they would put down a circle because that was the quote-unquote Jewish form of putting down a signature, where they did not want to put their name because they did not know or understand the quote-unquote American or Latin or really Phoenician alphabet, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, I don't believe that Meyers Leonard did not understand the repercussions of what he was doing, that he did not grasp the potential consequences of utilizing that word in an open form, on the open airwaves. I just don't believe that. So it's very obvious to me that he is another agent of chaos whose job it is to quote unquote inflame racial tensions so that he can be used as an example of what not to do and further socially engineer society. Because right now the Luciferians are heavy on this anti-racial rhetoric kick. If you say anything that they deem to be inflammatory, they're going to try to have you removed, or as they say, canceled. And someone who is expendable, like a Meyers Leonard, who also was used as a signifier for the anti-BLM movement, he's a perfect candidate. But when I saw him with the blonde hair and the black and white clothes, I said, okay, this guy's another asset.
Well, that's the point. For him to say, sorry, I didn't know what it meant. Like, I never even heard the word before, in a sense. So I would never say the word because I had never heard it. And then
now you'll notice they constantly keep showing this photo right here of him in the Miami jersey, which of course is black, white, and red, and with the number 0, which also, as I've already stated, was used, or the circle was used as a signifier for the so-called Jews coming in from Europe into America. So once again, they're playing that numerology game in the same way that the number 42, which is associated with Kyle Larson, means nigger. The number 0, or the circle, it literally means kike, and he's the person who used that word. So that's how I know this is just a continuance of the same process or the same strategy to try to cause mainstream society to accept a lot of the new philosophies about race by using, some strategically placed assets to embarrass themselves or to shame themselves.
I would never say a word that I don't know what it means. Like that, to me personally.
Well, shit, if that's the case, you'd never speak.
Wow, like for me to just run around and say a word and I have no idea the definition, that's crazy.
Right. If you listen to the context in which he used it, he was mad that somebody was like shooting at him, was like sniping him. And so it's clear, even though he might not have known the Webster's dictionary definition of the word, it seems clear, at least to me, in my opinion, that he knew.
I'd be interested to know what the relationship is that Meyers Leonard has with the person that he was having his little video game tournament with, if that's how they speak to one another, if that's how they joke.
Was something that was bad, and it was a derogatory word. So
and he dug in and picked that word out too. So he actually had like a little pause period that I think is very damaging to him, because he had a second where he was trying to find which slur he wanted to use, and that's what he came up with, I guess. But he was really like that is difficult to believe that you just didn't know that it was a negative term then.
I'm not really buying his excuse, but Julian Edelman, NFL star who identifies as Jewish, issued a statement.
He identifies as Jewish. So that's what we're doing now. They already have he identifies as a man, she identifies as a woman, she identifies as a man. They already have that spiel. So now he identifies as Jewish. But then again, that's far more pertinent than the other examples that I listed, because all he can do is identify as a quote-unquote Jew, because ancestrally he's not a real descendant of the tribe of Judah.
To Meyers Leonard saying, quote, "We've never met. I hope we can one day soon. I'm sure you've been getting lots of criticism for what you said. Not trying to add to that. I just want to offer some perspective." I won't read the entire letter, but essentially what he's trying to say is casual ignorance is harder to combat and has greater reach than intentional ignorance. So what he's saying is, like, he doesn't think that Meyers Leonard used that word specifically in an anti-Semitic way, but the fact that it casually came out of his mouth is a problem, and he wants to educate him on the history of the Jewish people and why that word is so dangerous and shouldn't be used and so offensive. And he actually...
Right, but does Julian Edelman even know where that word comes from, or is he just being sent out like almost like a hallway monitor is there to scoop up all the kids who are going to the bathroom for no reason, making sure that they're not smoking weed or just hanging out by the lockers? Like, what really are Julian Edelman's credentials to suddenly act as if he's going to educate everyone who says anything that is deemed to be quote-unquote anti-Semitic? Does he really even know his own history?
Invited Meyers Leonard to come spend a Shabbat dinner with Julian and his family to try to help educate him, which he's getting a lot of praise from a lot of people in the Jewish community about the way he's handling that. Julian.
You know, brothers, this entire society operates through a series of smoke screens, hidden under facades, placed inside of enigmas. It's like there's just so much bullshit and lies on top of lies, where you have people acting as if they're going to edify or elucidate on situations that they themselves have no knowledge of. You're just supposed to accept the pretense.
Is who I'm referring to.
Yeah, because he has every right to be mad, Evan, and I think if he lashed out, he would be totally within his right, but that probably doesn't help Meyers Leonard. It doesn't prevent this from happening in the future. I think we can now use this as a teaching moment for people out there, not necessarily just an NBA player, for somebody out there who might not understand some of the things that Jewish people have went through throughout their history, and maybe you prevent something like this from happening again in the future. So I think it can actually be a positive now. It's better that Julian approached it this way, but I would have completely understood if he blasted Meyers Leonard.
Well, okay, talk about black.
Right, but if Julian Edelman were to quote-unquote blast Meyers Leonard, then he would have to deal with the possible repercussions of deciding to take that tact, as opposed to taking the quote-unquote high road. Julian Edelman is trying to build a brand for himself. So you don't build a brand by being the person who just attacks everyone who says or makes statements that are deemed to be quote-unquote anti-Semitic. For example, look at Emmanuel Acho, who currently is the co-partner on the television show Speak for Yourself with Marcellus Wiley. He's making a name for himself basically as the quote-unquote Black Oprah. He's trying to style himself as the person who's going to cure racism. There's a lot of huckster and Nigerian scammer in Emmanuel Acho. But I understand that he grasped that there's a great niche there for a cat who is eloquent, articulate, and appears to be able to communicate well. So I'll leave him alone when it comes to that. But there's definitely a lot of Nigerian scammer in Emmanuel Acho. But that's neither here nor there. Julian Edelman is trying to utilize a lot of those same facets or those same components to build himself up as the person who's going to explain why it's wrong to be quote unquote anti-Semitic.
Here's Michael Rappaport, who was not so peaceful with Meyers. He went off on him. Take a look.
Meyers Leonard. Bunch of things to discuss on this. First of all, I'm full Jew, Ashkenazi Jew.
Right, but what does that even mean? Do you know what that means? You're a full Jew, Ashkenazi Jew. Where's the term Ashkenaz in the Bible associated with the tribe of Judah? Ashkenaz is located in the vicinity of what we would call Far Eastern Europe. What does that have to do with being a descendant of the tribe of Judah? Unless you're saying that that's just a name that you adopted and adapted for yourself. Now, for those of us who've done real research, we know that the term Ashkenazi Jew is just a more palatable way of saying a descendant of the Khazars, who were a Turkish people. That's what this person is, Mr. Michael Rappaport. He's a descendant of a Turkish tribe, or a tribe associated with the Turks, who basically came from the quote-unquote Caucasus Mountains, or the realm known in the ancient world as Tartaria, a part of the realm known as Tartaria. The Bible calls it the bottomless pit. That's where he emerged out of, or his ancestors emerged out from. So there's a lot of ignorance on both sides. And the frustration comes because people are trying to get dug in based on false pretenses. And it's really up to the so-called black man to delve into the truth so that he can start to teach himself and teach his own. Because people are going to start to look to the so-called black man to be about something other than sports and hip-hop in these last days, especially in your own so-called community. But it starts in the household. A lot of these brothers out here, they just want to grandstand and get attention by talking to strangers. It's about how you teach yourself and how you teach your family. Because the TV is 99% bullshit. Like Denzel said at the start of Training Day, when Ethan Hawke's character was talking to him, Denzel said, this is my newspaper. It's filled with 99% bullshit, but it entertains me. That's what TV is about.
Goofy 7-foot bleach blonde headed dumb. I want an apology on video. Okay, your written explanation. Okay, I want an apology on video. Okay, explaining yourself the same way you explained yourself about standing for the national anthem, which I think was very heartfelt and made sense to me.
Yeah, so remember, Meyers Leonard was the person when most of the players and staffers of the NBA, when they were inside the bubble, were taking a knee for the national anthem as a show of solidarity in the effort to put a spotlight on police brutality and social injustice.
This right here was the moment where they targeted him to use him, or maybe this event was just the pretext to set up what transpired a couple of days ago with him calling a so-called Jewish person a quote-unquote kike. Everything is narrative driven. It's like when you watch a soap opera. The events that occur in episode 1 of season 4 are going to have a ripple effect in episode 12 of season 4. That's how things are with what occurs in front of the curtain for the masses to intake. This is all just procedure and processional. It's contrived, it's scripted. Now, many of the actors are not aware that their lives are being scripted. A lot of these brothers in the NBA, they don't know what the hell's going on. They're just trying to keep their checks coming in and not get called a coon on social media. But there are about 20 to 30 strategically placed assets in the NBA and in various other sports as well, whose job it is to act as channelers or directors for the overall script and how they want things to go forth or proceed.
Meyers stood and explained himself, and what Michael Rappaport has said.
Please keep in mind that the hand over the heart is for masonry. So this photo here is almost like a visual double entendre. It's not just for the quote-unquote pledge of allegiance to the flag. It's also to show that he is in the know masonically.
I want the same sincere...
And of course, interestingly enough, this photo and how it's depicted is almost like he's a master mason. And you have the two slave-minded so-called black men with their arms around his legs in obeisance to him or in servitude to him.
Sincere explanation that you gave for your decision to stand as you did for your decision to use that hateful language. And I want to add this on top of that for me as a Jewish person, I'm getting really sick and tired of all the anti-Semitism out there lately, right?
Right, but what does that term mean, anti-Semitism? In order for someone to be anti-Semitic, we have to describe accurately what a Semite is. If you want to know what a Semite is, then you must go to Genesis, the 10th chapter, and read about the descendants of Shem and who they are. It's not just about the quote-unquote Ashkenazi Jews. There are a bevy of nations that proceed from Shem. So can you be anti-Semitic or anti-Shemitic if you're also of the line of Shem? That's the question that must be asked.
We dealt with this from Stephen Jackson when he tried to, argue. He said some anti-Semitic stuff.
Stephen Jackson, another agent or pupil of Baal. We already covered this character right in the aftermath of the George Floyd. He's the quote-unquote twin of George Floyd, or Castor and Pollux, that dynamic in the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul.
About Jews and a banking conspiracy to Deshaun Jackson, who tried to quote Adolf, who incorrectly quoted Adolf Hitler.
Yes, Deshaun Jackson. I believe that the page that he was citing was on page 126. And I delved into that number to a degree. It's just a coded way of saying 666. He's a Luciferian, also placed under the programming. His father was his programmer / handler. But I mean, this goes on all over the place. Dak Prescott just signed a contract to resign with the Cowboys for how much? $126 million guaranteed. That's why I stated that situation that occurred where he got his ankle snapped, that was a hex that was placed on him by Jerry Jones. Dak had to be placed or put through a particular trial so that he can get the money. Jerry's doing all this because he's desperate to win another championship, so he's casting as many spells as possible.
And thought that was a good thing. To Deshaun's credit, he sat down with a Holocaust survivor and had a good conversation with that person. I think they made some progress after that. Yep. But then you look at NBC and that show Nurses, where they portray Jews in a very anti-Semitic way. And then you look at the news, there are all these reports that show you that...
Can we get the example of what occurred on this show Nurses that you're complaining about?
Semitic hate crimes are up big. The Jews are the targets of a lot of hate crimes.
Big time. Yeah, big time, Evan. It's getting out of control. If you look at the top hate crimes in New York City, they're aimed at Jewish people.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what you categorize as a quote-unquote hate crime. If all you think is a hate crime is someone running up on you and busting you in the back of the head and taking your money, then that's one thing. But if we're also going to describe the wanton and purposeful propagation of mis and disinformation at various communities, the biggest recipients of hate crime are the so-called black man and black woman, who are constantly told lie upon lie every damn day.
Numbers across the board or across the country are up big, and it's disturbing as a Jewish person to see anti-Semitism just so casually being injected into society again, and it bothers me. It bothers me a lot.
Well, the question begs to be asked, would you consider so-called black men and black women being targeted for predatory mortgage loans and things of that nature to be a hate crime? Because that would not be normally described as a hate crime, but it is if they're targeted based on race, financial situation, economic status, etc.
We need to hold people accountable like Meyers. I'm not saying cancel Meyers Leonard, but...
Well, Meyers Leonard is not going to be canceled. He'll be utilized for something else. Once again, he's a pupil of Harpocrates. He's an agent of chaos.
Hold people like him accountable for what they say. I'm sick of it, and it needs to end now.
Well, brothers, that's basically it on that. We'll see where things go in this narrative, the storyline involving Mr. Meyers Leonard. We see that they end this segment with an image of Meyers Leonard wearing the red T-shirt with the white heat inscribed on the front of the T-shirt to let you know that he's a high-level witch. He's doing the bidding of those who are in control of him. He's in the know Masonically. That's why they kept showing that photo of him with his hand over his heart. But anyway, peace.